accepting the bribe, and the cost. That is, you lose the salary, and you also lose your prestige if caught. So this is, of course, notice that this is the left-hand side is the expected wage of a corrupt officer, and the other on the right is the expected utility, of a non-corrupt officer. And you immediately you realize that the bribe, the minimum bribe that you accept depends, of course, on the salary, but also depends on your type. It is a clear and obvious intuition. If you do not care about the status, then your minimum bribe is lower. If you care about the status, then the minimum bribe that you accept is higher, because if you care about the status, there is this additional cost of that you lose your prestige if you are corrupt individual. And therefore, you might look at this QIT, that is the probability of accepting a bribe, and notice that the probability of accepting the bribe depends on your types. So clearly, what we call H type are those who are less prone to be corrupted or to accept a bribe, and low type are those who are more prone to be corrupt for a given level of wage. And then look at, so theta is the level of corruption, and notice that the level of corruption is the probability that an officer is corrupted depends on the type, but only depend on the type because QH and QL are different, but also depend on the type because depends on who are the proportion or H type and L type in the population. Okay, and given this theta, that is the level of corruption, which is the decision of an individual whether to apply or not, of course you apply if the expected gain in being the profession is higher than your reservation utility, but the reservation utility of being in a profession, again, depend on the status. So again, for people who care about the status, the fact that the status is high or is low make the difference, because the expected utility of applying here depend on the types you are. So if you just, for this presentation to fix the idea, you might think to the extreme case of alpha L equal to 0 and alpha H almost that tends to 1. Okay, so there are someone who really care only about the money, and someone who really care about the status of the profession. And clearly, so the expected utility of being an officer for those who care about the status strongly depends on the decision of the other individual. So in equilibrium, if there are many people like you, then there is low corruption, then there is high status, and you like to apply. If no one is like you, so if there are only people who care about money, if the high corruption, if the level of corruption is high, the status of the profession is very low, and you have less incentive to apply for the profession. So, and so given, notice that in particular the case of alpha L is equal to 0 is very easy to present. Why? Because those guys, those who are just interested in money, their decision is independent of the decision of the other. So I look at the salary that I get, and I only interest whether accepting or not a bribe and whether applying or not, independent of what the other guys are doing. So the decision of the L type for alpha L equal to 0 is independent of the other decisions. In equilibrium, independently of the status, you have the same fraction of individual of L type who apply for the position. Okay. While for the H type, this is not true, because of course for the H type, these depend. So just the first proposition say that, okay, there are some conditions for the existence of the equilibrium, because we like to discuss about something that exists. And the second is this obvious observation of today, that when you introduce the fact that people care about the status, you immediately end up that condition about having multiple equilibria. So just to fix the idea, consider a level of wage, okay? So why you might have two different equilibria for the same level of wages? We might have different level of equilibria because if everyone, alpha L type, so suppose that the wage is very low of this profession. So first, the low type, many low type apply, and those who apply are basically all corrupted. Okay, are all corrupted because so the salary is low, so any bribe is going to be accepted, basically. If the status of the profession is very low, high type have no incentive to apply. Have no incentive to apply because since they care a lot about the status, a low status means that the utility they can get by applying is very low. So basically you might have equilibria where only L type apply for the same level of wages, for a given level of wages, there is no I type apply, and those who apply decides whether to accept a bribe depending on the previous condition. But you might have a completely different, a good equilibrium in which there are many H-type that apply, the status of the profession is high, and the level of corruption being, there are a lot of H-type that apply, the level of corruption is low. So we have this typical, this multiplicity of equilibrium. Why this multiplicity of equilibrium is relevant? Because basically, when you look at the policy you are interested, this depends on, this depends on the equilibrium you are looking for. So for instance, I have time just to mention the wage. So why, and I give you the intuition, why a wage increase may have a perverse effect. So in the case there is a high level of corruption, suppose that all people there is basically corrupt, if you increase the wage, you are making better for corruption because the moral hazard effect, the cost opportunity of being corrupt is reduced, okay? And you have a low effect on the composition. Why? Looking, for instance, at the equilibrium in which there are basically a lot of H-type, if you increase these wages, the composition effect may be so large to increase corruption. Why? Because it's true that by a marginal increase of wage, you are increasing the cost opportunity of being bribed. But you also a lot of L-type enter if you increase the wages. So you are changing dramatically the composition, and this might have a perverse effect on the level of corruption. And therefore, so basically, since I have no more time, and I just mentioned that we look also at the added effect, and we study the effect of media and also non-monetary compensation.
Right there.
Does the effect of a change in wage depend on whether you're in the low wage, low equilibrium or the high equilibrium? I mean, how does it work?
The effect of the change of wage depend so I give you that this is depend on this type of, I can give you the formal condition. Then of course depends on how big is the composition effect with respect to the adverse selection effect. So this is the condition on why you have an increase at perverse effect, but it is easier to look for this case when alpha H tend to 1, alpha L tend to 0. So this is the left side is the positive effect on the fraction of L type that increases, and this is the right side is the effect on the moral hazard effect, the effect on the increase in salary on the L type. So if this effect is larger, it means that the opportunity costs for L individual increase so much that they are less corrupted. Here it is large, it means that there are a lot of L type who enters, so the composition effect is large enough to have a negative impact on corruption. This is much easier, notice, because alpha H that tend to 1s, here H type are uncorruptible. Alpha H equal to 1 means that are uncorruptible. Things are a bit more complicated mathematically speaking, if alpha H alpha is different 0 and 1, but it is the same. So it depends on the composition effect and on the moral hazard effect.
Why can't the officer ask for a bribe? Meaning, I would expect the one who cares low about the status, instead of somebody offering me a bribe, I could just solicit the bribe.
So if it is, so two questions. So one that is in our direction is the fact that you might think that also, so the probability of being bribed depends on your type. So if you're interested in money, you look for more occasion to be bribed. that is going in our direction. The other, so in our direction, in the sense that this is another reason for having H-type, because there are less opportunity of being corrupted. So the second question is about, so the same question is about asking for a bribe with respect to receiving a bribe. If I have high status, but in Italy, for instance, it's also a crime to solicit a bribe, so it's the same logic. You are going to be punished also for soliciting a bribe.
The stigma could be for the bribe giver also, you know.
Right.
Because you don't make initially distinction between bribe giver or bribe taker.
Yeah. We also look at the behavior of officers. We do not look at those individual, their opportunity cost of proposing a bribe or not.
And one last comment, that the empirical literature not only has looked at the wage, it has also looked at the relative wage. So not if my wage as a public official stays the same, but my opportunity cost, say wage of lawyer goes up, then you know it's more attractive or less attractive. So
Right.
relative wage also.
Yeah, it's relative wages are also relative wage.